which, I began, first of all, my name is Paul Gunter. I'm director of the Reactor Oversight Project at Beyond Nuclear. Beyond Nuclear has only been around since 2007, but worked for 16 years with a group called Nuclear Information and Resource Service in Washington. And before that, I was involved with a group called the Clamshell Alliance in New England. We started out in 1975, basically organizing around a construction project for two Westinghouse pressurized water reactors that were proposed for a saltwater estuary on the New Hampshire seacoast. And we set about through a process of public education, nonviolent direct action, taking lessons from Martin Luther King, Mohandas Gandhi, the suffragettes movement, on how important citizen involvement, citizen participation, participatory democracy, this is how change happens. Every major change begins with the public becoming aware, becoming active, and using the principles that we have in democracy to make change. And the nuclear issue is no different. And these, as we know, are often long struggles. And in fact, I often quip half-kiddingly that I'll have to reincarnate to address this issue. More particularly, if you understand that the issue of nuclear power, the electricity is only a fleeting byproduct. The legacy is millions of years of nuclear waste for which there will be no benefit to any of the succeeding generations. Only this liability of building barriers within barriers within barriers over decades, over centuries, to contain the hellish byproduct of nuclear power. And that, basically needs to be put into this context that uranium, in fact, is the currency of a coin whose flip sides are nuclear weapons and nuclear power, nuclear waste. So we need to keep in our vision that it's more than just the nuclear power issue, but we're now faced with the spread of this technology means the spread of nuclear weapons as well. So the context that we work in at Beyond Nuclear is to address both the need to abandon nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And that this is a matter of planetary survival. You'll have to excuse me also because I'm a little croupy from recovering from the flu, so hang in there with me. I brought some literature that there's here on the table. Please take this literature and check out our website. So the message that I want to bring you tonight, in the short time that we have to share together, is that Fukushima has basically changed the landscape of the nuclear issue. And what it raises is really the issue of not only the danger of nuclear power itself, but when the profit motive is lost on this industry is really when our problems begin. We can begin to address the need to shut down nuclear power plants, but that's only the beginning. The deeper problem is that this whole environmental dilemma is captured by a corporate infrastructure, corporate power that really began at Hanford with the production of the nuclear weapons. So you're right here at the birthplace of something fiendish that that will have consequence even beyond its perpetrators. And that it is such a strong presence that it even manages to capture entire governments. And we've seen this most clearly in this opening slide. I mean, here we have the 5 commissioners of the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission: William Magwood, Christine Savinky, Allison McFarland, George Apostolakis, and William Ostendorf. And I'm sure they're all people of integrity. But they are part and parcel of a systematic and systemic capture that goes even beyond the boundaries of the United States. It's a global industry now. It's a global process. Next slide, please. And it has consequences. And I've known since 1978, actually, was when I first became aware of the issue of a catastrophe waiting to happen. I was involved in the process of organizing around the Seabrook Nuclear Power Construction Project. We were faced with a more imminent threat from an operating nuclear reactor that had just began in 1972. And it was a General Electric Mark I boiling water reactor in Vernon, Vermont, just across the Connecticut River from where I lived in New Hampshire. And we were aware that this was a bad design, fundamentally flawed. And that awareness really grew over several decades. And when I got a call from CNN on March 11th, 2011, they asked me to come in and comment on camera for the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer. This accident had occurred in Japan as a result of the earthquake and the tsunami that we were all aware of, but something was now awry at the nuclear power plant at Fukushima Daiichi. There were high radiation readings around the perimeter of the facility, and they asked me to come in and within a 10-minute conversation, the journalist Jean Meserve, who, by the way, was the sister of Richard Meserve, who was a former commissioner of the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So here I am being interviewed by Richard Meserve's sister on a nuclear accident that was occurring in Japan. And she asked me, just very simply, what is your concern? And I said, well, our concern is that this reactor could literally blow its roof. And in fact, that's what we saw the next day. It was just a matter of hours when what was occurring while we were on camera was fuel damage at the Fukushima Daiichi facility. And in the process of that fuel damage in the core, there was this liberation of hydrogen gas from the intense heat and electrolysis and the interaction between the zircaloy element that makes up all the fuel in these reactors. And you should understand that zirconium, which is it's a very strong alloy that is a very effective heat transfer element, so that when you heat uranium, enriched uranium through the criticality process, it transfers heat very, very efficiently through very thin walls, but it's very strong. But if you powder zirconium, that's what goes into high explosives. That's the flash powder in flash bulbs. And when uranium interacts with zirconium, and you get this interaction of the zirconium overheating, interacting with water, it separates out the elements of water into hydrogen and oxygen, and you get a very explosive environment that is looking for an ignition source. Well, I should note that Anthony Petranglia, who's also was on camera, said that, well, that chance is very, very remote. And in fact, nuclear power has consistently relied upon this premise, this assumption that the probability of that worst case is so remote that the risk is well worth the taking and the benefit. Next slide, please. But in review of the accident, the Japan National Diet, which is the Japan's equivalent to our Congress, their Nuclear Accident Independent Investigation Commission, quite frankly, concluded that Fukushima was a man-made disaster, and that it was primarily the result of a collusion between government, regulator, and Tokyo Electric Power Company. But that collusion is precisely what's going on all around in all these regulatory bodies. That you have a system of where nuclear power is promoted by government subsidy, and that's historically been the case. We've known all along that going back to documents going to 1952, the Atomic Energy Commission put out a white paper where they interviewed and had a request for proposals to groups like Monsanto, Union Carbide, Union Electric, Detroit Edison, Westinghouse, General Electric. And their white paper was to request and promote the idea that government was looking for partnership with corporations for national defense. And that the government announced that there was now this opportunity for corporations to participate in the production of plutonium, and in the process of promoting plutonium production for nuclear weapons, they could co-generate electricity from the waste heat through nuclear power. And this was the premise in 1952. 1954, it's reframed as atoms for peace. And in that same era, we went from 8,000 nuclear weapons to 21,000 nuclear weapons in the United States. And eventually they did build one dual-purpose reactor that was precisely, I think even President John F. Kennedy was at its coronation. But generally speaking, the nuclear power issue took off on its own. But that was here in at Hanford, where the dream of this white paper in 1952 actually took root. And government and industry set forth a proposal to co-generate electricity for the purpose of plutonium production. And it is ever so now the threat that we see not only a man-made disaster from a mistake, but the overarching threat to all life on this planet from this partnership. Next slide. Aside from the mistake, I wanted to point out that another big concern that we've had for nuclear power is this is basically engineering 101 here, but this is not going to work for me. But we have what's called the bathtub curve. And essentially what it is whether we're talking about nuclear power plants or electric toasters, you introduce a product along a time and event sequence, accident sequence, failure modes. And we see that when you introduce a product early on, you have a period of high rate of failure. As they work the bugs out of the contraption, the failure rate falls off. It can be fairly steep, where you reach a useful life period. And then as components wear out, as you find materials are susceptible, corrosion, cracking, embrittlement, when that starts to set in, then we see the event horizon increase, the accident sequence increase, or what's called the wear out life. We're concerned that, in fact, right now we are probably somewhere early on in this phase out here. We've seen events already. 3 Mile Island was only 3 months old when it had its meltdown. Chernobyl was only 2 years old when it had its catastrophic accident. Now we're beginning to see other events here, like the Davis-Besse nuclear power station in Ohio, where we found a high rate of corrosion. Can I have the next slide? This is literally a reactor with a hole in its head. You're looking at the Davis-Besse nuclear power station, and in April of 2000, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission had this picture when the power station was set to go back online for 2 more years during refueling. So this was after the refueling. The NRC inspectors received this picture, and they gave a green light to the Davis-Besse nuclear power station, First Energy Nuclear Corporation, the go-ahead to operate for 2 more years. Anybody looking at this picture can tell that something very, very wrong is going on at this reactor. What you're looking at, in fact, is iron oxide roiling off the top of the reactor pressure vessel. Next slide. And in fact, what was going on was that this here is the top of the reactor pressure vessel. This is 7 3/4 inches of carbon steel with an inner liner of 3/16 of an inch of stainless steel. The stainless steel liner is there to keep the corrosive borated coolant that's in this pressurized environment, 2,000 pounds per square inch, operating at temperatures of 600 degrees Fahrenheit, to keep that borated corrosive coolant from eating its way out. But Davis-Besse had developed a crack in a susceptible material, Inconel 600, that is used as sleeving, a pressure-fitted sleeving, so the control rods can drive in and out of the reactor to control the reaction. And just the wear and tear had caused this cracking, and the borated coolant under this pressure was being forced out through those cracks, hairline cracks. The steam was then, it would flash to steam, and the steam would condense and rain down on the top of the reactor vessel head, which was again 600 degrees Fahrenheit, so the water would immediately flash off, leaving a puddle of boric acid. This boric acid ate through 6 3/4 inches of carbon steel, leaving the 3/16 inch liner now bulging from this 2,000 pounds per square inch pressure, so that it looked like a tire about to burst. And in fact, we were probably as close as 8 weeks, depending on what the corrosion rate is, nobody really knows, but 8 weeks from a major accident in Ohio from a pressure vessel rupture. But again, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they had not only seen that picture, but Davis-Besse is a Babcock and Wilcox pressurized water reactor. It is, there are 7 of these reactors in the United States. Babcock and Wilcox is the model of the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant. There were 2 units. One melted down in '79. Unit 2 melted down in '79, and Unit 1 is operational. But the NRC had known that 6 of the 7 Babcock and Wilcox reactors had cracks in the sleeving. The only one that had not been inspected was Davis-Besse. So the staff had, using its regulatory guidance, had formulated a draft order to shut down Davis-Besse early so that it could go through the inspections to look for those cracks. And they gave the order to the senior safety officer for the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission with the Nuclear Reactor Regulation Division, who took it to First Energy corporate headquarters and said, you know, we've got an order here to shut you down early for inspections. And the nuclear officer at First Energy Nuclear, according to the Office of the Inspector General, said, don't shut us down. It'll hurt our profits. It'll look bad on Wall Street. We don't have fuel here to make our refueling operation. The order was pocketed. It was never issued. And it was never issued according to the Office of Inspector General because, according to their investigation, it appears that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission needs absolute proof before it will shut down a nuclear power plant early. Next slide. We've also seen the whole issue of regulatory capture in what we've termed a revolving door between industry and regulator. Again, this is part of the concern. We hearken back to the warning, the national diet in Japan. Collusion of government, regulator, and industry was the cause of the accident at Fukushima. Here we see former NRC Chairman Dale Klein. In this picture, Dale Klein is now chairing the TEPCO Reform Committee in Japan. So he goes from U.S. nuclear regulator to TEPCO promoter. And he wants to restore. But, we had concerns about the NRC under decline through as early as January of 2007, when Chairman Klein, in addressing concerns about the vulnerability of every U.S. nuclear power plant to aircraft crash or attack, even more specifically, concerns were assuaged by Chairman Klein by saying nuclear power plants are inherently robust structures that our studies show provide adequate protection in a hypothetical attack by an airplane. No problem. Don't worry. Sit down. Be quiet. Go to work. Mind your business. We got you covered. Next slide. What he did not tell you was one of those studies was done by Argonne National Lab, specifically on U.S. nuclear power plants, in their evaluation of aircraft hazard analysis for nuclear power plants, September 9, 1982. This is while CGN is being constructed. It appears that for all U.S. plants currently under construction, it has been found that it is not necessary to require containments designed to take the impact of a large commercial jet aircraft. A complete contradiction from what Chairman Klein told the American public in the days, weeks, years following the ever apparent threat of our enemies, those who would do us harm, knowing that nuclear power plants are vulnerable. If you read the 9/11 Commission, if you've read the 9/11 Commission report, Al-Qaeda's original plan was to hijack 10 aircraft and direct 2 of them into U.S. nuclear facilities. One of those was a flight training exercise that Mohammed Atta took over Indian Point, just 25 miles from New York City, where they viewed the vulnerability of using nuclear power plants to enhance their attack. And yet the American people have been lied to. Not to protect us, but to protect the production agenda and the financial agenda of the nuclear industry. Next slide. Well, this brings us to our story tonight of collusion of government, regulator, and industry to protect not the American people, not the environment, but the financial and production agenda of this industry. What you're looking at here on the slide to the left is the Oyster Creek nuclear power plant in Toms River, New Jersey. It is the original Fukushima Daiichi. It was the first General Electric Mark I boiling water reactor, a 600 megawatt reactor commissioned in October of 1969, 60 miles from New York. This was the the first Mark I. The Mark I that was eventually to be used as a pattern for Fukushima Daiichi. And following the accident, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, in an effort to whitewash the consequence of operating dangerous, dated, aging, flawed nuclear power plants, put together a set of recommendations, as you will note, for enhancing reactor safety in the 21st century. Clearly, the agenda here is to continue operation. And in fact, what we've known is that in 1972, just a few years after Oyster Creek was commissioned, the chief safety officer within the Atomic Energy Commission, the predecessor of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, in a memorandum to his colleagues on September 25th, 1972, warned that the Mark I boiling water reactor should be discontinued. They should not be operated. They should no longer license the Mark I reactor, primarily because the containment structure, the all-important last barrier for public health and safety and the environment, was too small. Next slide.